Welcome to Books and More Audio, a channel where great ideas come alive through sound. Here, we bring you powerful book summaries that inspire growth, reflection, and success. In today's episode, we explore Outliers, the Story of Success by Malcolm Gladwell, a groundbreaking book that reveals the hidden factors behind extraordinary achievements. Gladwell shows that success is never just about talent or intelligence, but about opportunity, culture, timing, and effort. Through fascinating real-life stories, Outliers teaches us that greatness is not born, it's built. Let's dive in and discover what truly makes people exceptional. Introduction: The Roseto Mystery. I begin Outliers, the Story of Success, not with a tale of genius or ambition, but with a small town that defied science. In the 1950s, in rural Pennsylvania, there was a place called Roseto, where hardly anyone under the age of 65 suffered from heart disease. People there smoked, drank wine, cooked with lard, and worked long, exhausting hours in the nearby slate quarries. By all logic, they should have been unhealthy, yet they lived long, happy lives. Dr. Stuart Wolfe, intrigued by this mystery, decided to investigate. He looked at every possible explanation: genetics, diet, exercise, environment, but none could account for Roseto's remarkable health. The answer, he eventually realized, lay not in medicine, but in community. The people of Roseto lived in close-knit families. They visited one another daily, shared meals, celebrated together, and cared for their elderly. They built a social fabric so strong that stress and isolation, the true killers of modern life, simply couldn't take root. When the younger generation left Roseto and adopted the fast-paced, competitive American lifestyle, the magic disappeared. Heart disease returned, the town became like any other. And in that change lay an extraordinary lesson. Health and success are never purely individual achievements. They are shaped by the world we live in, the culture we inherit, and the people who surround us. The story of Roseto is not just about health, it is about how context creates outcomes. Just as the Rosetans' well-being depended on their community, the success of so-called outliers, people who stand far above the rest, depends on the hidden systems of opportunity, culture, and history that support them. This is the idea at the heart of Outliers. No one ever succeeds alone. Every success story is also a story of community, timing, and circumstance. To truly understand why some people rise to greatness, we must look beyond the individual and see the invisible forces that make success possible. Chapter 1: The Matthew Effect. In every field, from sports to business to school, success seems to follow a curious pattern. The rich get richer, the talented get more chances, and those who start slightly ahead end up miles in front. This phenomenon is known as the Matthew Effect, named after a verse from the Gospel of Matthew. For unto everyone that hath shall be given, and he shall have abundance. But from him that hath not shall be taken away even that which he hath. To see this principle in action, I looked at the world of Canadian hockey, where the best players are chosen as children to join elite teams. What I found was astonishing. A disproportionate number of professional players were born in January, February, or March. At first glance, this seems meaningless, but it has everything to do with how the youth hockey system is organized. The cutoff date for age group hockey in Canada is January 1. That means a boy born on January 2 is almost a full year older than one born on December 31 of the same group. At the age of 10, that difference is enormous. The January boy is bigger, stronger, more coordinated. Coaches mistake maturity for talent, and they pick him for the advanced teams. Once there, he gets better coaching, more ice time, more practice. He improves faster, and soon he really is better than the others. By the time he's a teenager, the gap has become unbridgeable. A small initial advantage has compounded into a huge difference. That is the essence of the Matthew Effect. Success breeds success. A child who happens to be born at the right time, or in the right place, or under the right circumstances gets opportunities that others don't. Those opportunities lead to better outcomes, which in turn lead to even more opportunities. The system rewards the already fortunate and forgets the merely average. The same pattern appears in education. Older students in a class often score higher on tests not because they are smarter, but because they are more mature. Teachers see their confidence and reward it with attention and praise, reinforcing their lead. Over the years, that small advantage becomes self-perpetuating. The gifted label follows them, opening doors that stay close to others who may be just as capable but slightly younger or less noticed. When we look at success stories, we tend to credit hard work and intelligence. But hidden beneath those virtues is a web of timing, structure, and opportunity that shapes who gets ahead. We celebrate individuals, yet we ignore the systems that created their advantages. If we want to create a fairer society, we must change the way we think about achievement. Instead of asking, how talented is this person, we should ask, what opportunities did they have to develop their talent? Because success is not just a matter of personal merit, it is a matter of context. The Matthew effect reminds us that the playing field is never level. Behind every self-made success is a series of chances, big and small, that built upon one another until the outcome looked inevitable. And so, the first lesson of Outliers is clear. Before we admire the winners, we must first understand the rules of the game. Chapter 2. The 10,000-Hour Rule. When we look at those who seem to stand at the very top of their fields, from musicians and athletes to programmers and scientists, we often assume they were simply born gifted. But the truth is far more complex. Behind every master lies a staggering amount of time and practice. In this chapter, I introduce what I call the 10,000-hour rule, the idea that to achieve true mastery in any field, a person must dedicate roughly 10,000 hours of deliberate, focused practice. Take the Beatles, for example. Before they became the greatest band in the world, they spent years performing in small clubs in Hamburg, Germany. They played 8 hours a night, 7 nights a week. By the time Beatlemania hit, they had already logged over 10,000 hours of live performance. That relentless grind honed their timing, cohesion, and creativity. They were not overnight geniuses. They were products of continuous repetition. The same applies to Bill Gates. Long before he founded Microsoft, he had an extraordinary opportunity as a teenager. Access to a computer terminal at his private school in 1968, something almost unheard of at the time. He spent night after night programming, not for money or fame, but out of pure obsession. By the time he dropped out of Harvard to start Microsoft, Gates had already accumulated well over 10,000 hours of hands-on coding experience. He was ready when the personal computer revolution began, not because of luck, but because he had been preparing for years. This pattern repeats itself across history. Mozart composed for more than 10 years before producing his first masterpiece. Professional athletes, elite chess players, and world-class scientists all reach the same threshold, about 10,000 hours of deep practice before they truly excel. It is the compound interest of effort. Every hour builds upon the last, shaping the mind and body into precision instruments of mastery. But there's a deeper truth. The 10,000-hour rule is not just about hard work. It's about access and opportunity. Not everyone can afford to practice for 10,000 hours. To reach that threshold, you need time, resources, and a supportive environment, the things society rarely distributes equally. Talent matters, but without opportunity, talent dies young. What the Beatles, Bill Gates, and other outliers had in common was not just skill, but circumstance. They happened to be born at the right time, in the right place, with access to the right tools. Their success wasn't accidental, but it wasn't purely personal either. It was the result of an invisible web of timing, culture, and luck intertwined with relentless practice. So, the lesson of this chapter is clear. Mastery is earned, but opportunity is granted. Success is never the story of a single person. It is the story of preparation meeting chance. 10,000 hours of practice may make a genius, but without the right door opening at the right moment, even the most gifted may never get the chance to prove it. Chapter 3: The Trouble with Geniuses, Part 1. When we think about success, we often imagine that intelligence is the key. We assume that the smarter a person is, the more likely they are to achieve greatness. But is that really true? In this chapter, I explore a surprising idea. After a certain point, intelligence stops being a reliable predictor of success. The story begins with Louis Terman, a psychologist who devoted his life to studying gifted children. In the 1920s, he identified hundreds of kids with extremely high IQs, calling them termites. He was convinced they would become the leaders, scientists, and geniuses who would shape the future. But decades later, the results were shocking. Most of Terman's prodigies led ordinary lives. They became teachers, accountants, or engineers. Only a handful achieved remarkable success. Meanwhile, people Terman had ignored because their IQs were too low went on to win Nobel Prizes. So what happened? The answer is that intelligence, while important, is only one piece of the puzzle. There is a threshold beyond which having more IQ doesn't make much difference. Once you're smart enough, what separates the extraordinary from the ordinary isn't intellect, but something else. Think of IQ like height in basketball. You need to be tall enough to play, but beyond a certain point, being taller doesn't make you a better player. Similarly, once a person's IQ reaches around 120, additional points don't translate into greater creativity or success. Raw intelligence reaches diminishing returns. What really matters is how that intelligence is used. Two people with the same IQ can have completely different outcomes depending on their social skills, confidence, and ability to navigate the world. Practical intelligence, knowing how to read situations, talk to people, and make things happen, is just as critical as analytical ability. We see this difference everywhere. Some geniuses can't hold a job or finish a project, while others, less brilliant on paper, thrive in leadership and innovation. Success depends not only on what you know, but also on how you act, communicate, and adapt. Terman's great mistake was believing that IQ alone could predict greatness. He studied minds, but ignored environments. He measured intelligence, but overlooked personality. The true genius is not the one with the highest IQ score, but the one who knows how to apply knowledge in the real world. So the lesson of this chapter is simple. Intelligence opens the door, but character and context decide what you do once you walk through it. Greatness is not born in the test room. It's forged in the messy, unpredictable world beyond it. Chapter 4: The Trouble with Geniuses, Part 2. In the previous chapter, we saw that raw intelligence alone cannot guarantee success. Now, we go deeper to understand why two equally intelligent people can have completely different outcomes in life. The answer lies not in IQ, but in social intelligence, the ability to navigate systems of power, communicate effectively, and assert one's needs. To illustrate this, let's look at two men, Christopher Langan and Robert Oppenheimer. Langan's IQ was estimated to be around 195, higher than Einstein's. As a child, he could read by age 3 and taught himself advanced mathematics and philosophy. But Langan grew up poor, with no support or guidance. When he tried to attend college, financial and bureaucratic troubles forced him to drop out. When faced with unfair treatment, he simply gave up. He lacked the skills to argue for himself, to persuade, or to ask for help. Oppenheimer, on the other hand, also brilliant, was raised in an affluent, educated family. His parents encouraged curiosity and conversation. He learned how to talk to adults as an equal. Later, when he got into serious trouble for attempting to poison his professor at Cambridge, Oppenheimer didn't get expelled or jailed. He talked his way out of it. His social intelligence saved him. The difference between these two men shows that success depends not only on what you know, but on how you use what you know.
Psychologist Annette Lareau calls this quality concerted cultivation. Middle-class parents teach their children to question authority, express opinions, and treat adults as collaborators. Poorer families, by contrast, often teach respect and obedience, qualities that may foster good manners but not assertiveness. When these children grow up, the differences become dramatic. The first group knows how to negotiate opportunities. The second often feels powerless in formal systems like schools or workplaces. Langen's failure and Oppenheimer's success reveal how upbringing creates invisible advantages. Intelligence gives you potential, but society teaches you how to realize it. A person like Langen could outthink anyone, yet, without the social tools to connect and influence, his brilliance stayed hidden. Oppenheimer, with both intellect and social fluency, shaped history. The lesson here is that success is a fusion of mind and environment. We often celebrate self-made geniuses, but no one truly makes it alone. Behind every great mind stands a network of cultural, social, and familial forces that teach us how to act, when to speak, and how to be heard. Chapter 5: The 3 Lessons of Joe Flom. Joe Flom's life is one of the clearest examples of how success grows out of opportunity, timing, and culture. He was born in the early 1930s in Brooklyn, the son of poor Jewish immigrants from Eastern Europe. His parents worked as garment workers, struggling to survive through the Great Depression. Nothing about his background suggested he would one day become one of the most powerful lawyers in America. Yet Joe Flom rose to the top of a field that had long excluded people like him. How did that happen? The answer lies in 3 lessons that reveal what truly creates success: the right time, the right culture, and the right legacy. The first lesson is the importance of being born at the right time. Flom entered the legal world just after World War II, during a time when the major law firms of New York were dominated by white Protestant men who refused to hire Jews. Because of that discrimination, Jewish lawyers could not find work at the established firms and were forced to start their own. At the time, those smaller firms had to take the work that the big firms rejected: hostile takeovers, corporate mergers, proxy fights. For decades, this kind of legal work was considered dirty and undesirable. But when the American economy shifted in the 1970s and mergers became the new business strategy, Joe Flom and his firm suddenly found themselves at the center of a booming industry. What was once a disadvantage became a huge advantage. The second lesson is about the cultural legacy of hard work and skill. Jewish immigrants in the early 20th century often came from backgrounds in clothing and tailoring. They knew what it meant to work carefully, with precision and patience, and to build something from nothing. That tradition shaped their children's approach to education and careers. Joe Flom inherited that same discipline, the belief that excellence comes from long hours of careful effort, not shortcuts. His legal brilliance was not simply intellectual. It was crafted through the cultural values of persistence, detail, and pride in one's craft. The third lesson is about demographic luck. Joe Flom was born during the Great Depression, a period when the birth rate was unusually low. That meant fewer students competing for places in schools, colleges, and jobs. When Flom applied to Harvard Law School, the class sizes were small and opportunities were more accessible. He entered a generation that had less competition and more room to rise. His success, therefore, was not just about who he was, but when he was. Joe Flom's story shows that success is never purely individual. It is shaped by the intersection of personal effort and historical circumstance. He worked hard, but he also benefited from being born at the right moment, into the right community, with a culture that prized hard work and perseverance. The story of Joe Flom is not just about law. It is about how society rewards those who are prepared when opportunity appears. Behind every great success are patterns of history, culture, and timing that we rarely see. Flom reminds us that being self-made is a myth. The truth is that even the most extraordinary achievements are built on the foundation of context, the invisible advantages of time, place, and legacy. Chapter 6: Harlan, Kentucky. To understand success, we must also understand failure. In this chapter, I tell the story of Harlan, Kentucky, a small town in the Appalachian Mountains that became known not for achievement, but for endless conflict. The story of Harlan teaches us that the forces shaping human behavior are often rooted deep in culture and history, passed down through generations. Harlan was settled in the 19th century by immigrants from the Scotch-Irish regions of the British Isles. These settlers came from a harsh, mountainous land where survival depended on defending one's family and property. There, formal law was weak and personal honor was everything. If someone insulted or threatened you, you fought back, not only to defend yourself, but to protect your reputation. This became known as a culture of honor. When these families moved to America, they brought that culture with them. In the isolated valleys of Appalachia, where government authority was still weak, those same values continued to rule. If a man was wronged, he took revenge. Families feuded for decades over small slights or property disputes. Harlan became famous for such feuds. The Turner and Howard families, for example, fought for years, killing dozens of men across generations. At first, this seems like simple violence, but psychologists later discovered something deeper. When researchers compared men from the southern United States, descendants of those Scotch-Irish settlers, with men from the north, they found that Southerners reacted more aggressively to insults. Their levels of stress hormones and testosterone rose sharply when provoked. Even in modern settings, they carried within them the emotional reflexes of their ancestors' honor culture. This culture of honor helped people survive in the lawless hills of Scotland and early America, but in a modern society, it often led to tragedy. In Harlan, the same traits that once protected families instead caused generations of bloodshed. The lesson is clear. Our cultural legacy does not disappear. It shapes how we think, act, and respond, even centuries later. This realization has profound implications for success. Just as violence can be inherited through culture, so can hard work, persistence, and social behavior. Some communities pass down a culture of discipline and cooperation. Others inherit suspicion and pride. These invisible patterns shape behavior more powerfully than any rule or law. When we study people who succeed, we must ask not only what they do, but where they come from, what values, habits, and emotional reflexes their ancestors left behind. Harlan shows that our history lives inside us. Whether it helps us rise or holds us back depends on whether we understand it. Success, then, is not just about intelligence or opportunity. It is also about cultural inheritance. To change outcomes, we must first recognize the stories that shaped us. The people of Harlan, like all of us, are products of the past, and the past, whether we see it or not, continues to guide the present.
Chapter 7. The Ethnic Theory of Plane Crashes. When a plane crashes, investigators search for mechanical failures or weather problems. But again and again, the real cause turns out to be human communication, the way people talk, listen, and respond under pressure. In this chapter, I explore how culture can shape even life and death decisions through what I call the ethnic theory of plane crashes. In the 1980s and 1990s, Korean Air had one of the worst safety records in the world. Their planes crashed far more often than those of other airlines. The aircraft were modern, the pilots well-trained, and yet accidents kept happening. When experts analyzed the cockpit voice recordings, they found something unexpected. The pilots were not failing technically, they were failing socially. In one crash, the co-pilot could see danger coming but did not tell the captain directly. Instead, he spoke in polite hints such as, "The weather looks a bit rough," hoping the captain would understand. In another case, the flight engineer tried to warn of low fuel but phrased it too softly, out of respect for authority. By the time the captain realized the problem, it was too late. These were not mistakes of incompetence, they were mistakes of cultural hierarchy.
Researchers found that in countries with strong traditions of respect for authority, such as Korea, Colombia, or the Philippines, subordinates are taught never to question their superiors. Linguists call this high power distance. In normal life, it creates harmony and politeness, but in a cockpit, where safety depends on clear, direct communication, it can be fatal. When Korean Air finally recognized this, they changed their training. Pilots were told to speak English in the cockpit, not Korean, because English carried less social weight and encouraged directness. They also practiced assertive communication. When something is wrong, you say it clearly. Within a few years, the airline transformed its record and became one of the safest in the world. The lesson from these tragedies is not about aviation alone. It shows that culture can shape performance in any system. A culture that values deference may produce politeness, but also silence. A culture that prizes independence may produce confidence, but also conflict. Success depends on finding the balance between respect and honesty, hierarchy and clarity. What happened in those cockpits mirrors what happens in companies, classrooms, and governments every day. Miscommunication born from culture can destroy entire organizations, while cultural awareness can save them. The ethnic theory of plane crashes teaches us a profound truth. No one escapes their cultural inheritance. It follows us into every situation, even when we think we are acting logically. True mastery and safety come when we recognize how deeply culture influences our behavior and learn when to listen to it and when to rise above it.
Chapter 8. Rice Paddies and Math Tests. At first, it might seem strange to link rice farming with mathematics, but the connection reveals one of the most powerful lessons in understanding success. The secret lies not in genetics or schooling, but in culture, in the habits and values passed down through generations of hard work in the rice fields of Asia. Rice cultivation is unlike any other form of farming. It demands patience, precision, and relentless effort. A rice farmer must flood and drain fields at exact times, plant each stalk carefully, and constantly tend to the water levels, pests, and soil. Every inch of land matters, and every mistake costs dearly. The work never truly stops. In contrast, European farmers who grew wheat or corn depended more on machines and seasons. They worked intensely for part of the year and rested during the off-season. But rice farmers labored almost every day. This continuous, detailed work shaped an entire mindset, a belief that effort, not luck, determines success. In cultures built on rice farming, perseverance became a core value. People learned that small, consistent improvements lead to mastery. Generations of this labor created what psychologists now recognize as a cultural advantage in tasks requiring concentration and persistence, like mathematics. Studies show that students from countries such as China, Japan, Korea, and Singapore consistently score higher on international math tests. It is not because they are inherently smarter, but because their cultures teach them to endure difficulty and to see effort as honorable. A problem that would frustrate a Western student into giving up becomes for an Asian student a challenge worth solving. One study gave students from different countries an unsolvable math puzzle and timed how long they would keep trying before quitting. The average American student gave up after less than 2 minutes. The average Japanese student worked for more than 10. The difference in persistence perfectly mirrored the difference in test performance. Patience and diligence, not raw intelligence, made the difference. When we look at education through this lens, it becomes clear that success in school is not only about curriculum or IQ. It's about attitude, about the willingness to stay with a problem longer than anyone else. That same patience that kept rice farmers tending their fields for centuries still lives on in their descendants, now sitting in classrooms instead of Paddies. The rice fields taught an unspoken truth. Effort creates ability. Every hour spent refining a skill brings a person closer to mastery.
This cultural inheritance explains why some societies seem to value education more deeply, because learning is simply another form of work, and work has always been sacred. So, when we marvel at the academic achievements of Asian students, we are not witnessing a miracle of intellect. We are seeing the echo of generations who believed that excellence comes from labor, focus, and persistence. The rice paddies were not just farms, they were schools of discipline, and the lessons learned there continue to shape success around the world. Chapter 9: Marita's Bargain. If you visit the Bronx in New York City, you'll find a school that quietly challenges everything we believe about intelligence, opportunity, and success. It's called KIPP Academy, part of the Knowledge is Power program. In this chapter, I tell the story of one of its students, Marita, a 12-year-old girl whose life shows how the right environment can change everything. KIPP is not an elite private school. It serves children from some of the poorest neighborhoods in America. Yet, its students consistently achieve at levels that rival those of the best suburban schools. The secret is not magic, but time. KIPP students go to school from 7:45 in the morning to 5 in the evening, often 6 days a week. Their school year extends into the summer. They do hours of homework every night. It is exhausting, disciplined, and demanding. When I spoke to Marita, she told me about her daily life. She wakes up before dawn, takes a long bus ride to school, spends 10 hours in class, and studies late into the night. She rarely watches television or plays outside. At first, that might sound unfair for a child, but Marita doesn't see it that way. "I'm working hard now," she says, "so I can have a better life later." That is Marita's bargain. She gives up the carefree ease of childhood to gain control of her future. What KIPP understands, and what most traditional schools overlook, is that success is a product of practice, persistence, and culture. Wealthy children naturally accumulate these advantages because their homes are full of books, conversations, and expectations. Poor children often don't. The long hours at KIPP simply create the time and structure that more privileged kids already have. Researchers discovered that the real achievement gap between rich and poor students doesn't come from the classroom, but from summer vacation. When school stops, affluent students keep learning through camps, travel, and reading. Poor students fall behind. Year after year, the gap widens. By eliminating long breaks and increasing school time, KIPP gives kids like Marita the chance to catch up and even surpass their wealthier peers. But there's something deeper in this story. KIPP students succeed because the school builds a culture that treats effort as noble and achievement as a collective goal. Teachers and students believe that hard work is not punishment, but a pathway to freedom. That belief mirrors the lessons we saw in earlier chapters, from rice farmers, from the Beatles, from Bill Gates, that mastery comes only from relentless effort and opportunity. Marita's life reminds us that success always has a cost. The hours she spends studying are hours she cannot spend relaxing or socializing. Yet her sacrifice gives her something far more valuable: choice. For the first time, she can decide what her future looks like instead of having it decided for her. The lesson of Marita's bargain is the lesson of Outliers itself. Achievement is not about genius, but about systems, the environments that shape behavior and reward persistence. Wealthy children naturally accumulate these advantages because their homes are full of books, conversations, and expectations. Poor children often don't. The long hours at KIPP simply create the time and structure that more privileged kids already have. Researchers discovered that the real achievement gap between rich and poor students doesn't come from the classroom, but from summer vacation. When school stops, affluent students keep learning through camps, travel, and reading. Poor students fall behind. Year after year, the gap widens. By eliminating long breaks and increasing school time, KIPP gives kids like Marita the chance to catch up and even surpass their wealthier peers. But there's something deeper in this story. KIPP students succeed because the school builds a culture that treats effort as noble and achievement as a collective goal. Teachers and students believe that hard work is not punishment, but a pathway to freedom. That belief mirrors the lessons we saw in earlier chapters, from rice farmers, from the Beatles, from Bill Gates, that mastery comes only from relentless effort and opportunity. Marita's life reminds us that success always has a cost. The hours she spent studying are hours she cannot spend relaxing or socializing. Yet her sacrifice gives her something far more valuable: choice. For the first time, she can decide what her future looks like, instead of having it decided for her. The lesson of Marita's bargain is the lesson of Outliers itself. Achievement is not about genius, but about systems, the environments that shape behavior and reward persistence. If we want to build a fairer world, we must give every child, not just the lucky ones, the chance to make the same bargain Marita did, to trade comfort today for opportunity tomorrow. Because in the end, success is never accidental. It is the result of time, effort, and the right culture working together.